I've been playing Rivals of Aether 2 until I physically had to stop. The game beat me, boys. And the reason I've been playing it so much is because it's a lot of fun. Movement feels great, I love the new mechanics, and just like in the original Rivals of Aether, characters have very diverse, interesting, fleshed out movesets that are really exciting to explore. Everyone's got a bunch of cool, creative, and powerful moves, but which ones are the most powerful? That's what we're here to look at today as I break down the best move on every single Rivals of Aether 2 character. Let's do it. So the Rivals of Aether series is based around the 4 classical elements, and we're going to start with the fire characters here who have twice as many reps as any other element. Dan. Funny that Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 had this exact same thing pop up with the Avatar characters. I guess media just likes fire. So I'll add a disclaimer right away that for a lot of characters on this list, it was actually really hard to pick a best move, especially since we are in the game's early meta, but for Zetterburn, no. It's Shine. It's definitely Shine. Or Fire Pulse if you want to get technical about it. I guess Fire and Bat Pulse with the vampire skin. Shines are pretty much always great moves in platform fighters. It's a very revered type of move stemming from Melee, Fox, and Falco. This must be one of the strongest examples I've seen in the genre though. It's some of the absolute best shield pressure in the game, which is not something every Rivals 2 character has easy access to. You basically just need to hold it if they hit this on your shield and try and punish what they do next. Because like a lot of Shines, it's jump cancelable, and because it's jump cancelable, that means it's wave dash cancelable, and the tech barrier for this is exceptionally low. Keep in mind, I'm not a Zetterburn player. I've never played a Spacey in any platform fighter before. I can do this pretty much no problem. Rivals of Aether 2, like most modern platform fighters, has very lenient wave dashes. You basically just need to jump and air dodge sideways at the same time and you'll get a perfect wave dash. It's not like in Melee where you really need to manually time everything. And it's also got much more customizable controller options. So in my case, L is air dodge and shield as usual, and then I have the left bumper is set to short hop. So I can just kind of do this and then throw a Shine into the picture. All the expected suspects are there. You can Shine into grab. You can Shine into the fast combo starter of your choice. And, very importantly, you can Shine into up strong. Every Rivals 2 character has some kind of elemental gimmick. Now, for Zetterburn, it's that some of his moves light his opponent on fire, and you can see they take a little bit of damage over time there. That's great and all, but the real payoff is that when his opponent is on fire, Zetterburn can then consume that fire with one of his strong attacks, smash attacks, or his forward throw, and then the attack deals way more damage and knockback than it normally would. And Shine is one of the moves that lights his opponent on fire. So that means that Zetterburn has a frame 2 omnidirectional near unpunishable attack that both lights his opponent on fire and sets up for moves that benefit from his opponent being lit on fire. That's nuts. Speaking of being omnidirectional, Rivals of Aether has a lot more moves relative to Smash that don't send opponents at one fixed angle. It's based on the positioning between the characters, so if you're above your opponent, you'll send them down. If you're below them, you'll send them up, etc. So that means that relatively speaking, this is a Shine that can do everything but is less consistent compared to something that always sends at the same angle, but on the other hand also gives it more versatile use cases if you're good enough at controlling your positioning. Speaking of positioning, it also lets you stall in the air for a bit. That's always a nice tool to have. Oh, and also fairly uniquely among Shines, you can also charge this one. So you can see how if that always sent your opponent downwards, for example, that would be insane. Zetterburn has a lot of excellent moves. Basically all of his aerials are really good. Forward air and up air are a little inconsistent, but their kill power is quite powerful at the sweet spots. Back air is a great combo tool that lights his opponent on fire. He's got a great projectile, a great grab game. Like, Zetterburn has a lot of amazing moves, but Shine, like in many instances where they show up, is the heartbeat of his kit. Not too hard a choice on that one. Now moving on to Claren, who's my main in Rivals 2, and a lot of people's main. She's a very simple pick up and play character. On the surface, there's actually a lot of intricacy behind her once you start diving in more, but bottom line, she's got a big sword, and she's got a lot of really good sword moves, and that actually made this a much trickier choice than Zetterburn for me. I think at the end of the day, though, I probably have to say Danner. It's not necessarily the most used move on her kit, but it is one of, if not her highest quality moves. Claren is the plasma embodiment of fire, which is probably illustrated better with the actual plasma sword compared to the Halloween chainsaw, and she combines that with some time power. She's a time traveler in the lore, so all of her tipper moves stun opponents in place for a second, which means you really want to be landing them as the basis for a combo game, and Danner's tipper hitbox is really generous and it leads to a lot. It's got your obvious use cases, you know, it's a really strong edge guarding tool, that speaks for itself, and is also pretty good to land with. Claren is not a character who gets a lot of free close range shield pressure, so doing ambiguous cross-ups from above is a pretty good strategy with her. It's an incredible combo starter at a huge range of percents, including, very notably, with a lot of the sour spot stuff too, and this is part of the thing that makes a big difference. Unless you're very specifically going for an edge guard situation, and there are cases where even that's not true, landing a sour spot of down air will very rarely, if ever, screw you over, and you can't necessarily say that for some of her other really good moves. Forward air, for example, you can just look at this and tell me that it's going to be one of her most used moves, right? And she's a sword fighter, of course she's got to spam low forward air, that's just how the archetype works. But it's got a lot of inherent inconsistency built into it. There are 2 hitboxes and each of them have a sweet spot and a sour spot on it. And on top of that, it also has a reverse hit. And yes, this is absolutely something you can get better at controlling as you get better at the game. You can improve your spacing to begin with. You can drift back a little bit more. You can stop going for fair into fair as much to begin with. Do more like forward air into neutral special, that kind of thing. But even at the best of times, no matter how good you are, there are times where forward air will mess with you. And that applies to a lot of the rest of her kit. Clarin is just inherently a bit inconsistent by design. Dan air has somewhat more predictable behavior than a lot of her moves, while also being one of her best payoffs when she lands it. Now, another move that's actually relatively predictable on her kit is Forward Strong. It's one of her very few non-tipper moves that will ever kill, and when you land the tipper, it kills incredibly early, and it's also got all the hallmarks of just a very good Forward Strong. It covers a big arc in front of her, it's pretty quick, the tipper of it actually perfectly hits on a lot of low platforms, so you can get some powerful setups with that. Additionally though, Clarin has a really nasty throw game at high percents. She's got a forward throw and a back throw that work as a 50-50 on DI. This is a reference to how she worked in Rivals 1 where nobody had grab, so they gave her a command grab, which was also a 50-50 on DI. They just folded that into her conventional grab. That would be a good tool, but what makes it a really scary tool is specifically Forward Strong. Because my god, if you get that DI guess wrong, or even don't get a chance to guess at all because the forward and back throws are so quick that they're borderline unreactable, you can just explode at stupidly early percents. I think Wisely also mentioned that some good Clarin players think that neutral special may just straight up be your best move, and I could see it. Uncharged tipper neutral special is one of, if not her, absolute best combo starters and linkers. It just sends your opponent straight up, and when you charge it up, it becomes a really nasty edge guarding tool with a huge hitbox, a lot of kill power, and an air stall that means she can make it back to stage pretty freely. Don't get me wrong, it's always risky to go for deep edge guards, but because of that air stall, she can go as deep as she wants and still at least make it back by herself if she's not intercepted. That's really impressive. And you can even use the stall combined with B reverses to go for landing mix-ups and stuff like that, so it's got a lot of great points in its favor, but at the end of the day, it's mostly a synergy move. You don't really tend to use it raw all that often. It's a little stubby, a little laggy. It's very good, and I think the future of Clarin basically depends on how good you get at linking together neutral special stuff, which admittedly is still something I'm very much working on. But yeah, at the end of the day, Dan air just comes with a lot of those strengths, and whoa. Dan. But yeah, at the end of the day, Dan air just comes with a lot of those similar linking strengths, but on top of that, it's a much higher quality standalone move that you can use in a lot more scenarios. It's good in neutral, it's good in disadvantage and advantage. It does it all. And then we have Forestburn here, who you'd think based on being the whole edgy smoke hyena thing would be the villain of Rivals, but fun fact, he's actually an innocent man who was framed for murder. Bro's not doing himself any favors with the skull mask though, that's on him. Forestburn has some very, very good aerials overall. You've got stuff like Dan air, this giant sweeping arc that sends out if you hit it from the front, and if you hit it from the back, it's a spike. You've got stuff like up air, which is this really, really good juggling tool for opponents who are above you, and his back air, which has tons of confirms into it and is one of the better just like throw it out straight hit kill aerials in the game. Sour Spot even has combo potential. You've got this giant neutral air. So he absolutely does come to the table with just a very good solid selection of pseudo sword fighter moves. He can certainly play that style comfortably. There are other characters where it's a more defined part of their play style though that do it better. More coverage, higher damage setups, that kind of thing. So if that's all Forestburn brought to the table, it would just kind of be a budget version of other characters. Thankfully, it's not all he brings to the table. He also has a very unique stealth aspect to his gameplay, and this comes out in his moveset in several ways, but I think his side special, the clone, is by far the most important one. Forestburn gets to split himself in two, one of which is the real character that you can still control comfortably, and the other one just kind of moves around stupidly, and then when you want, you can actually blow it up, and it's got a decent little hitbox on it that opens up a lot of combo routes for Forestburn. Forestburn, as you saw, can also spawn smoke behind him, and that makes him invisible, and if he inhales 3 clumps of it, he can still spawn the clone, but this time, it does a lot more damage. And then the full inhale clone gets some other neat properties too. With the basic clone, you only get to choose between a couple of simple behaviors. You can make it change from aggro to defensive, and you can force it to stay on the ground, and you can make it combust, and that's about it. Now, with the full inhale clone, on the other hand, this one will actually periodically attack all by itself. Now, as you can see, it's not the most reliable thing in the world, but you can actually make this a lot better just by tapping the special button to force it to attack. So I'm mashing special right now, and you can see it suddenly gets a lot more aggressive. Now, You're still relying on the AI to choose the move contextually for the situation, and it tends to only throw out a handful for the most part, but that's still obviously a lot better, and this upgraded version of the clone is also a lot more resilient. Unlike the base level clone, you can hit Forsburn himself, the real version, and it won't blow the Inhale clone up. So it acts much more as its own independent entity. Put all these traits together, and this is where Forsburn looks like he's starting to break open a little bit. Most of the best sequences that you see do involve the clone, and he's a very mixed opinion character right now. A lot of people don't think he's particularly good, but some of his best players disagree, and they're the ones who have the best understanding of how clone operates. It's more than just an attacking tool though. Clone is very, very good in disadvantage state. It completely splits what your opponent has to try and hit, and it really helps that you're free to choose which side the clone comes out on. It just depends on which direction you hit side special in. Pair that with the smoke, which obscures the clone as well as Forsburn, and that's when you really start breaking ankles. Like I said, he's a stealth character and a platform fighter. That's pretty cool. And a lot of this was true in the original Rivals of Aether as well, but for Rivals 2, they actually gave it a brand new utility that makes it even more important. You can have the clone throw Forsburn back towards the stage. I mean, you can do it as an attack as well, and it does work, but realistically, this is meant for recoveries. In Rivals of Aether 1, Forsburn really only had one recovery move as up special, but that was fine because the game didn't have ledges, and in compensation, every special move, even the ones that put you into freefall, could still be wall jumped out of. In Rivals 2, on the other hand, that is not a thing. You can't wall jump out of most up specials anymore. For other special move types though, including ones that launch you sideways, yeah, no problem. So it does a very good job filling that gap in for him. He still doesn't have the best recovery on the entire roster, but without side special in particular, it would be a hell of a lot worse. You could also argue that Smoke is Forsburn's most important move because it's just such a vital part of what he does. Once he gets the full Inhale stack, he can get not just a full powered clone, he can also do a combust attack himself, which is very powerful. But a lot of Rivals characters have some kind of like, you must do this for elemental synergy kind of move, and as a general rule of thumb, I think it feels like a bit of a cop-out answer. You know, comparing it to Smash Ultimate, it might be kind of like saying Pikmin Pluck is Olimar's best move because without that he can't use any of his other attacks. Okay, cool. And honestly, even completely ignoring that point, there's still a very good argument for just choosing the clone anyways, straight up. It's an absolutely indispensable tool in disadvantage state for multiple reasons. It's a very vital part of what makes him scary in the neutral. It's good. Also like talking about it because it's just such a cool concept. I love Forsburn's design. And then as our last fire rival, we have Loxodon, one of the newcomers, and he is actually the villain, by the way. Rivals lore, traveling back in time to defeat the Axe Elephant before he becomes an immortal mecha. So one of my first instincts here was to choose forward tilt as his best move. It's definitely one of his signature moves. It's personally one of my favorite moves in Rivals. I love how it functions. This initial hook in into a slam out, and there are all sorts of different mix-ups you can do on that. You can do forward tilt one into his jab or his grab or other tilts. Go for some loops if you're feeling bold. And it obviously covers just an ocean of space. It's a great approach tool. It's a great defensive tool. On top of all its setups, it also will just straight up kill, especially if you hit them with that outer portion. In my heart, I want to go with it, but in reality, I know it's got some counterplay and it's not that safe, and I think if you look at how good Loxodon players actually function, you'll just tend to notice that forward air seems to fill that same role a bit more consistently. It doesn't have as much horizontal coverage as forward tilt does, but it's still one of the more disjointed attacks in the game, so that's pretty hard to complain about, right? And because it hits at an uppercut angle, short hop forward air is such a good air to ground move, but it still has the properties of an anti-air as well, whereas forward tilt, for all its strengths, it still more or less just covers the ground. Like, you can wave dash back or whatever and make that kind of a pseudo anti-air on an opponent who's trying to jump in on you, but this right here, no pseudo needed. That is just a straight up anti-air that still covers the ground. You can get some very nice reward off it, great protect chases early on. It has weirdly low kill power behind it, which I can actually say for a lot of Loxodon's moves. It just feels like an elephant with a giant axe should be hitting a bit harder with more of his stuff. It's not unusual for Rivals of Aether to assign very rigid roles to moves as combo starters or kill options. In this particular case, I think design-wise it does interfere with the power fantasy a bit. That's not really what this video is covering though, and the nice thing about it from a pure gameplay perspective is you can often actually chain multiple forward airs together, which does a lot of damage and can sometimes kill off the side. If you want more raw kill power, you could go with back air instead, which is much stronger, as you can see, and is another very good space control tool without the same kind of anti-air potential though, and it doesn't have a lot of combo utility either. It's not zero, but it does have so much knockback growth that it starts falling off pretty quickly. I think some other candidates might be his neutral special, that lava ball, which everyone immediately just started calling the meatball. Shout out to the devs for wholeheartedly embracing that and making some money along the way. It's a pretty good just straightforward projectile, but what makes makes it really interesting is you can fire it out at multiple angles, and then you can further manipulate those angles by hitting it afterwards. And as you can see, it puts a pool of lava on the ground, which locks it on, absorbs, and then he can play into that with stuff like his down special, which sends him further and further the more charges he has. The tusks even have a hitbox on them, and a surprisingly powerful one to boot, but locks it on, as you can tell, is a big boy. Now the thing is, heavyweights and rivals are not actually that much slower compared to the rest of the roster, but still, backing off and creating space to fire off projectiles is harder for them than anyone else, so stuff like the meatball is not nearly as fundamental a part of his kit as some characters deal with. It's more like use it when you've got the opportunity to. He's not really a zoner. Overall, I'm gonna say forward air is just such a good bread and butter tool that gets so much use at any stage of a game. I gotta go with it. And then moving into water, we get into Orcane. Now, if you're not familiar, Orcane's a very strange character, not really comparable to anyone in Smash because he actually spins off from Vaporeon from one of Dan Fornace's very first Smash fan projects, so he's very much doing his own thing. And you've got some pretty crazy stuff going on here. You've got moves that fire puddles into the ground, and you can absorb those puddles to make your strong attacks extend further. You can teleport into them for your up special, that's a lot. Blow them up into bubbles. You've got a forward air that can send you absolutely flying across the stage. This was dreamt up by madmen. You've got some of the most absurd frame data of any character, some of the wackiest movement options, but out of all I've said, I think his best move is just his humble neutral air. There is one odd thing it does. It bounces off the ground, which plays into Orcane's very goofy movement. It'll do that even if it hits someone. But while that's cool, it's not what makes it so good. This thing is lightning quick. Frame 4, which is the single fastest aerial in Rivals 2, competing only with one other move, Rano's neutral air, and it's active for a long time, and it just sends at the perfect angle to do whatever you want. It starts combos, it links combos together, it knocks opponents off stage, it does the edge guarding afterwards. You can use it to approach, you can mash it to break out of disadvantage state. It'll even kill at later percents. You can do that raw, or depending on their DI, you can kill confirm into itself. Yes, it is stubby, but that's really its only major flaw, and it's honestly not even that big a deal here. Like I said, Orcane's an extremely slippery character, he has a lot of unique movement characteristics, and it's really not a problem for him to get in his opponent's face, and Orcane can even approach behind projectiles, so yeah, getting in there, really not the end of the world. Orcane has a lot of very good quick moves. This right here, that's frame 7, but when you watch the really good Orcane players at work, including Marlon, who's generally considered to be the best Rivals 2 player right now, one thing that really stands out to me is, wow, they really are using neutral air in every situation, aren't they? So that'll be the one. And then we have Rano, the poisonous pacifist, who's infamously not all that much of a pacifist at all. Rano was another tricky one because the water characters in general, I guess, just get some really sick movement options because he's got side special, this tongue slingshot, and you can use that to build up some pretty nutty momentum. He gets to control the placement of a giant poison bubble, and he can slingshot off that too and mix it in with some crazy B-reverse movement. On top of that, he can also put his opponent inside the poison bubble himself. This is a command grab, so it goes through shields, and you can see it's got quite good range, and as a bonus, it's also just a very good general purpose offstage stalling tool. So it's a strong contender for me. The issue I have, though, is he does need space to set it up, and it's not the hardest thing in the world to make space. Rano is very fast on the ground, and he also has the needles that can help him camp, but it's not the most general purpose thing in the world. It's very good, and the best Ranos can do some very fancy, interesting stuff with it, but outside of recovery situations specifically where mastering it and the bubble really is key to surviving, it's not like the staple of his kit. Rano also just has some really excellent aerials. I mentioned his neutral air. This is the other fastest aerial in the game. They can be kind of finicky to approach with sometimes though, because look at how incredibly agile and mobile Rano is on the ground, and then look what happens when I go into the air. Like, all that momentum just vanishes. So that naturally incentivizes me to start looking at his grounded moves instead, and I think the one that really stands out is down tilt. It's really quick at frame 6 without too much end leg, has a very nice long range hitbox with 2 parts on it. There's the toe hitbox that pops them more up, and then this one that pops them out a bit more. With good DI, the inner hitbox will stop reliably comboing. Eventually I've got the CPU to hard DI away there, but keep in mind, this is so fast that it can be hard to react to. And as for the toe hitbox, that just keeps on trucking. And at earlier percents, you're basically gold no matter what. Even with perfect DI, the worst thing you can really hope for is a tech chase, and Rano just thrives off tech chasing. It's a big part of his design. I think down tilt also just plays to Rano's inherent strengths very well. He's very fast on the ground, like I said. He's also a very low to the ground character, and while it does lose to crouch canceling, which is an option in Rivals 2 and a relatively powerful one, it's a great option to crouch cancel with yourself. In fact, it's one of the more rewarding ones. It pairs really nicely with a lot of different sequences. If you look at good Rano's play, a lot of the time what they're fishing for in some capacity is down tilt. That could be landing it raw in the neutral, which is not a bad option. It could be comboing an aerial into it. It could be tech chasing into it. But as a general rule of thumb, anywhere in a combo or a string or whatever kind of sequence they're able to open up, they can get a down tilt or multiple in there, they will, because it's not that hard to do and it leads to so much, including a lot of Rano's win conditions. It helps that he has just a shockingly good jab too. It's really quick, weirdly safe against shield, and provides a lot of reward if he follows it all the way through. It applies poison stacks, which are Rano's signature gimmick. And I say if he follows it through because Rivals of Aether has jab canceling in it, so you've got this incredibly safe close quarters panic button that, if you land it, combos into his best combo tool. So yeah, he does have a lot of other very high quality moves too, but the way he's designed overall, this character who thrives on this sort of grounded pressure, I think down tilt just fits that play pattern the best. It has phenomenal reward, it's easy to land, it sets up a lot of his best kill confirms. Not the flashiest move in his kit by any means, but it does open up room for a lot of the flashy stuff. Now heading into the Earth characters, we have Craig representing Rock. Now Craig was one of the earliest rivals created. He was the series' first heavyweight, and he set a strong precedent for the kind of wacky out of the box thinking you could expect from movesets. And apart from being turned into one of Rivals 2's grapplers now, that really hasn't changed all that much. He still has a phenomenal recovery because he can spawn a pillar literally anywhere underneath him. He's got this armored approach tool that jump cancels on hit, and it even has more utility in Rivals 2 because you can just manually cancel out of it now. And on top of those expected heavyweight tropes, you know, your armor, your survivability, your grappling, he also has a surprisingly sophisticated projectile game that mostly stems from his rock, which he can throw quite quickly, and he can re-grab it, and it sets up combos, and it edge guards incredibly well, can break it into shards and launch them at all sorts of different trajectories. That would already be enough to define him as an interesting heavy zoner, but the funny thing is, that's not even his only projectile. And that aerial command grab I just did, that is actually the same move as this when you do it in the air without a rock in your hand. So he's got a lot of zany, convention-breaking stuff that you could go with, but like with several characters on this list, I've just got to keep it simple, and my choice for his best overall move is this right here. Forward air. Ever since the original Rivals of Aether, this has been giving Craig basically everything he could possibly ask for in a brawling tool. It's one of his most reliable kill moves on a character who has absolutely no trouble killing. A lot of his staple combos end in it, and a lot of his combos start with it too because it's such a good neutral tool. It's relatively quick to start up, certainly by his standards, and look at this range on it. These legs and these legs are not the same. It leads into so much, including into itself. If you catch your opponent DIing poorly, it'll straight up kill them there, and if they hold in on that second hit instead, he can legitimately just do forward air, forward air, forward air. You can't avoid this by DIing away the first time around, but look at what a horrible position that puts you in, and that's a heavyweight. Guess wrong just once though, or don't react in time, and it's probably lights out. That's not even mentioning some of the other offstage stuff you can do with it either. And just because this combo game needed some more help, it's got a sour spot on it too. Why not? Yeah, this is another one of those Orcane neutral air situations where you can certainly appreciate what the rest of his toolkit is doing, and it is a lot, but no matter the matchup, no matter the player, whether they're an advantage, disadvantage, neutral, there is a very good chance that forward air is going to show up any second, and often more than once. It's a god move, it does everything. And then we get to Maple, who's the fastest rival right now, and out of everyone, she may have been my biggest struggle for this list. Like with Rano, she's very nimble and low to the ground, which makes you want to look at ground moves, and the one I see abused most often is probably dash attack. Maple rarely thrives off whiff punishing. On top of her speed, she also has traps that she can hide behind and a projectile, and when she whiff punishes, dash attack is often her tool of choice. It's got fantastic burst distance, it hits twice, and it hits high up the second time, so it can catch jumps, for example, and it's a launcher that has pretty good payoff. I say pretty good payoff though, because that natural angle it sends out does certainly lead into stuff. It already has some backwards trajectory though, and DI in Rivals is pretty powerful, so if they do hold away, that starts falling off. And because it's a multi-hit, you do need to be careful with that. It can whiff at point blank range and is not very safe on shield either. She's got some really effective aerials. Neutral air puts in a lot of work, and so does forward air. That's one of the better spikes in the game. Spikes always break crouch canceling in Rivals 2 as well, and this is one of the better approaching spikes because it is still a conventional forward air arc. So that's all great on paper, but in practice, I just don't really tend to see good Maples do this that often. Once she does knock her opponent into the air though, she really likes to chase after them, and the most reliable way she can do that is with neutral air. But whenever you watch Maple's really devastating, cheap, top tier looking segments, it seems like up air is pretty much always doing the heavy lifting. She's so fast on the ground, and unlike with Rano, that momentum doesn't vanish the second she jumps. And when you combine that with up air's big lingering multi-hit that has knockback, which is perfectly tuned to both combo into itself and kill off the top, she has just a phenomenal juggle game. And that's really helped out by a bonus property of the move too. So here's how high she can normally reach just by jumping, nothing spectacular. Here's what she can do when she uses up air. Now, as a multi-hit, It does come with some consistency issues. You really need to make sure to follow along with your opponent's drift, and sometimes it might still just not pan out anyways. The good maples don't really seem to flub this too often, but it is something to be aware of. And there's more with that falling out thing too, because you would assume up air's trace would make it a natural finisher for tether combos, but from my understanding, that's not actually a thing in Rivals 2. You do absolutely see it happen at this point in the game, but to my knowledge, which does come from what other people have said, I haven't extensively labbed this myself, it's more of an exploit than anything else. If you hold up the entire time, you'll get out of the combo. That was an intentional design choice. I still think up air needs to be the choice, especially because it's actually a pretty substantial boost to her recovery, and Maple's a character who needs the help. She doesn't have a very good one, but I hope you get why this is one of the trickier selections. She has some moves that are obviously phenomenally powerful, but at the same time have very notable flaws, and then she has other moves that don't have those kinds of obvious flaws, but they're just not nearly as broadly applicable overall. And then we get into our final element, wind, starting appropriately enough with Raster, who's one of the more air-centric characters in the platform fighter genre. He can stay up there a very long time when he wants to. As you'd expect, Raster's largely built around some very good aerials. You may not be expecting just how sword fightery some of them feel though. Not all of them are like that, but even some of his other ones have this very well-defined air manipulation kind of feel to them, and that does create a strong, clear gameplay style for him, but it also makes these moves a bit hard to separate from each other in terms of choosing them for candidacy. That playstyle a lot of the time is jump towards your opponent, press the right stick in their direction, repeat. He does that a lot, but when he's doing it well, it's generally moving towards a common goal, and that is aerial forward strong. Raster, uniquely among the Rivals roster, cannot do strong attacks on the ground whatsoever. Instead, he can do them in the air. And don't get me wrong, they're all good, they all have a lot of use, but this thing right here, the big clap, that is what he's looking for most of the time. It's hard to overstate just how many different routes he has that end in this, and despite having multiple jumps, I would say he's not nearly as vertically oriented as you may expect. There are characters on the roster who can actually do ladder combos better than him. Not that he can't do those, but between his naturally great horizontal chasing and the huge boost it gets when he's in his slipstream gimmick, which notably only increases horizontal momentum, and then all of his moves that pop opponents into nice diagonal angles for him, he's definitely looking to carry people across the sky more than anything else, and that generally means opening them up to the big clap. It's really not that hard to land. This has got a massive hitbox on it, and you want to be landing it as often as possible, especially on the tipper hitbox, because like, I know Raster is light, but Jesus, you can go for some harder read options, edge guards, stuff like that. It fully stalls you in the air for a long time, so it's really not that bad to line up. This isn't Raster's only horizontal finisher. He has sweet spot up special, neutral air can get there in a pinch, and you know what? Sometimes he might even just straight up carry you off the side with forward air, but by and large, forward strong is what Raster is looking for. Forward strong is what makes his air game scary. Without it, he'd start carrying you through the air and hope for a more niche kill confirm, or maybe to set up an edge guard, and those aren't bad by any means, but specifically because forward strong does exist, basically any time from mid% and up, or sometimes even earlier, that he starts comboing you, you have to wonder if that's going to be your stock right there. It comes up over and over and over. It's not even exceptionally rare to see all three stocks in a match taken by forward strong, and hey, at the end of the day, this is a platform fighter. Taking stocks is the only real goal. And then we just have Fleet, Rivals 2's other newcomer at launch, and as you might expect by the bow, she is by far the most zonery character on the roster right now. So it makes sense to me that her best move should be side special, which is also her most zonery move. It's 2 projectiles in 1. This is a very common opinion that I've heard a lot. I have no reason to disagree. So yeah, this is a two-parter. You've got that initial shot, which is a pretty solid hit by itself, and then you've got that multi-hit tornado that follows behind it. And as you'd imagine, that creates a boatload of pressure, a fast projectile into a slow-moving projectile that sets up combos. It does take a long time for her to draw the bow back, so you need some space, but that's fine. Like I said, Fleet's a zoner. Space is exactly what she's looking for. And this is so good that basically anytime you can set it up, your first priority is setting it up. It's angleable as if it needed even more strength behind it, which makes it really good at hitting the ledge. My god, this thing is oppressive when you're sent off stage. That cyclone just lingers forever, and it sets up so much. It is a bit weird that it doesn't interact with her neutral special. With basically any other arrow move she has, she can empower it, and then if she connects that on her opponent, there's a small countdown, and then there's a charge that blows up. Maybe they just thought it was good enough already. It still feels a little bit unintuitive to me. Like, naturally, I think that should work when things like her jab apply the charge. It also does have to deal with the usual being a projectile in Rivals 2 syndrome, where every character through parrying has a universal projectile reflector, and because the initial shot has a reactable amount of startup and then this is very slow, there is certainly room to parry that. You do see it pop up decently often in high level play, and if Lee gets hit partway through the move, the tornado disappears. You know what? Fair enough. Realistically, this controls so much space for so long that kind of counterplay was mandatory to give it. A couple other candidates I looked at were this thing here, her float, which is kind of similar in concept to Peach's float from the Smash series. It's not as good. It doesn't open up those crazy float cancel shenanigans, but as you'd imagine, it's still certainly very good and you can definitely do a lot with it. If you've seen my Smash Ultimate take on this format, you know that at this point I do kind of consider Peach and Daisy's float to be an honorary special. It's not the only non-traditional input special move the roster has. I know that's not a universal opinion though, and in Rivals I would probably say it's even more of a murky call. Her aerials naturally pair very well with the float and are obviously moves in the very non-murky sense. A lot of the time you'll see float into neutral air strings off the side. That's a major way she takes stocks. That would probably be the closest candidate for me, but you've got down air, which is very, very good at that job too. She gets a lot of her kills with up air nowadays too, and even outside of that, it's just really nice to have a big disjointed juggling tool. It does have a sour spot on it though. Not the end of the world, but not always what you're looking for either. Nope, I'm happy with my choice, but like I said at the beginning, this was a hard list to make. I did my usual process of pulling both from my own experience and studying what must be close to every Rivals 2 tournament posted right now, but I'm under no delusions here. Like I said, I've done this format with Smash Ultimate before, and honestly, even several years later, and even making some calls that I knew would be controversial at the time, I'm pretty comfortable with that list. If you ask me, I'd say it's aged quite well, and I'm happy to admit when they don't. But that's Smash Ultimate, and this is Rivals of Aether 2, a game that I have literally thousands less hours invested in, and there's far less footage available for me to study. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's plenty of disagreement here. I've explained my thought process. By all means, feel free to drop yours, and who knows, maybe it's a topic I'll have to revisit someday because I could see myself playing Rivals 2 for quite some time. It's really fun. Thanks for watching, everyone, and yeah, like I said, let me know your thoughts. Likes and comments go a long way towards bumping a video up in YouTube's algorithm, so if you think this one deserved it, much appreciated. You can check out another MockRock talk video here, and Echoes of Wisdom Smash moveset over on MockRock below, and patrons, members, and subs get perks like early videos and Discord access. Later, people.